So I think, for the most part, this is review some of these concepts. I know that in seventh grade you probably talked about osmosis and diffusion, and somebody said you already did certain activities related to that. So that's sort of what we're talking about here in this section. So what we call those things, osmosis, and these are forms of transport, things moving from one place to another. That's our focus. And there's sort of two different categories of transport, and they're called active and passive transport. So the first one is we'll talk about is passive transport. Passive transport, the example you're probably familiar with is diffusion. Diffusion is when molecules of a substance just on their own will go from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. That's what diffusion is, the movement of molecules from high to low concentration. It doesn't take any energy. You don't have to move, nothing has to move molecules in that way. It's just their natural pattern of movement is from crowded areas, high concentration, to less crowded areas, low concentration. Sometimes I use this analogy to explain it. If I took every 10th grader in the school, I bet I could probably fit them in this classroom, every single one of them. Close the door, close that door. It'd be really tight, and you'd be like shoulder to shoulder, probably be smelly and hot and sweaty, but probably we could do it. That would be an example of a high concentration of 10th graders, obviously, a crowded area. So let's say I did that, and then I opened up the door into this little office over there. What would happen? Would everyone go in there? Some. Would I have to tell people probably, hey, go in that other room, there's going to be more space? Or would they just do it? Probably just do it on their own. That's sort of like an analogy for diffusion, right? That if molecules are in a crowded area, they're going to spread out to a less crowded area. And then if I open the door in the hallway, then people will spread out even more. That's an example of diffusion. Movement of molecules from high to low concentration. Now, when we're talking about cells, which is our focus, some molecules, like these little purple ones in the model, they can just go through the membrane. So these purple circles, they're more concentrated here outside of the cell. And so they're going to spread out and they will go inside of the cell. Now, will they all go in there? No, they're going to spread out until they're about equally concentrated. That process is called diffusion, and it's an example of passive transport. Passive just means it doesn't require any energy. So some things can just go right through the membrane like it's not even there. Not most things, though. Small molecules can sometimes do that, but most molecules cannot. Other molecules, they need a special kind of passageway to get from outside of the cell to inside, or vice versa. Okay? And this is called facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is just same thing as diffusion, but there's some protein. You could see this protein here is kind of acting as a tunnel because these molecules can't just go through the cell membrane. They have to go through this special membrane protein in order to get through. It still doesn't require energy. So it's still an example of passive transport, okay? But it does need this protein to help it happen. It's facilitated or helped by these proteins. Osmosis is just a type of diffusion. So osmosis is still diffusion, but it's a special case. When we're talking about osmosis, what substance, anyone have an idea, is moving? Osmosis has to do with water. If it's water that's moving across a membrane, we call it osmosis. It's just a different term. But it's the same general process. Water will move from an area of higher concentration of water to an area of lesser concentration. So what has the highest concentration of water possible? We've used it a few times. Just water. Distilled water is just water, H2O. Like those gallons of water that we use in the back for different things, that is distilled water. It doesn't have any other molecules mixed in with it. It's just water. Okay? That's 100% water. That's the highest concentration of water you can have. Okay. We would call that solution hypotonic. These are some terms we use. When we're trying to compare concentrations of different substances, we use these three terms: hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic. Hypotonic means there's very little or no molecules mixed in with the water. Say it's hypotonic. Hypo means under, like a hypodermic needle goes under your skin. Somebody has hypoglycemia, they have low blood sugar. Hypo means low or under. If something is hypertonic, it means it has lots of other stuff dissolved in it. There's more solute in this substance, and therefore a lower concentration of water. And then the other term is isotonic. It means equal concentrations. When cells are in a hypotonic solution, a solution that is highly concentrated with water, what typically will happen is they will gain water and swell up. Cells in a hypotonic solution expand because water goes into them because it's going from a high to low concentration. Cells that are in a hypertonic solution generally shrink. They shrivel up because water is moving out of them from a high to low concentration. And if we put something in an isotonic solution, it generally doesn't change. And we could see examples of this. Okay, so this diagram shows that in plant and animal cells. So if we look at this first situation, so we have a blood cell, and it is in a hypotonic solution. That means maybe this is 100% water or 99% water. Okay? It doesn't have much else dissolved in it. A cells, they have a lot of, the cytoplasm of a cell has a lot of water, but not 100%. They're like 90, let's call this 94% water inside the cell. So if there's a higher concentration of water here outside of the cell, there's a lower concentration inside of the cell, then water is going to go into the cell from high to low concentration. And the cell is going to expand. Blood cells can actually burst because so much water has gone into them. Single-celled organisms that live in fresh water, like in ponds and stuff, like that thing we saw in the ditch water, they have special organelles and adaptations that help them get rid of excess water so they don't swell up. Here's a plant cell. Same thing, if we put this plant cell, say it's 94% water, in something that's 99% water, it's hypotonic, water's going to go in. But typically plant cells aren't going to burst because the cell wall is kind of holding everything in, kind of containing it. This middle solution, or middle diagram, isotonic just means equal. So if this cell is 94% water, and we put it in a solution that's 94% water, well, yeah, some water is going to go in, some water is going to go out. It's going to stay the same. Same thing with the plant cell. Water is going to go in and out at equal rates. And then finally, in the last situation, now we have a hypertonic solution. So let's say my cell is still 94% water, but now it's in a hypertonic solution, something that's like 90% water. Now the situation's reversed. Now water is going to be moving out of the cell because it's going from a higher concentration inside to a lower concentration outside. And cells that are in a hypertonic solution typically shrivel up. They lose water, so they kind of shrink. And we could see that this blood cell shrank. We could see this plant cell. Its vacuole has lost a lot of water, and so it's kind of shrinking. The outside doesn't change much because it's a rigid cell wall, but the inside is kind of withdraws. And so this is really important. There's lots of examples of this in our daily lives of how osmosis and diffusion come into play. But so Madison was talking about contacts earlier. Anybody wear contacts? I do. I have horrible vision. I wear contacts. So if you don't know, if you wear contacts, contact lens is a little piece of plastic, which is actually mostly water, okay, to help oxygen go through. Maybe they're like 98% water. Sometimes they say in the box. When you store your contacts overnight, do you fill them up with the little contact case with water from your sink? No. What do you put in there? Solution. Yeah, that contact solution is made, and like every once in a while, like I put it in my contact, put it on, and like drips down my face, and if it goes in your mouth, you could taste it. You know what it tastes like? It's like a little bit salty. Yeah, it's like a little bit salty, and there's a reason for that. That's due to osmosis, because your contact lens is mostly water. Let's say 98%. What if you just put it in tap water from the sink, which is 100% water? What would happen based on what we just talked about? Why, Ryan? Yes.
Because it has less water concentration than the
right.
Water.
It would be this situation. If we put it in a hypotonic solution, water would go into your contact lens, and actually its shape would change. And it wouldn't fit correctly. It wouldn't help you see as well. So instead, what is contact? So what was the term we would use for contact solution compared to the contact? Right, it's isotonic. It has some salts and stuff dissolved in the solution so that water goes in and out at equal rates and it doesn't change. All right, we'll stop there for now about that part. Okay. Oh, I gotta do this over here. Okay. So passive transport doesn't require any energy. It just happens. But there is another type of transport where energy is required. And this is called active transport. Obviously, the opposite of passive is active. Active transport is when you move molecules the opposite of the way they would normally go. So normally molecules would go from high to low concentration. Cells can move things the other way, low to high, but it requires energy. And in cells, the molecule that's used for energy is ATP. That is the energy of the cell. We'll talk more about it when we talk about respiration this week. But ATP is energy for the cell. And we could see that in this sort of diagram. This works by some proteins that are in the cell membrane. And what happens is, so if we're trying to get this sodium outside of the cell from low to high concentration, it's not going to do that on its own. So it takes some energy. So these proteins take the sodium, ATP is used, and it pumps it out. These are like pumps. Just like water naturally will flow downhill without any energy. But to get it up to the top of the hill, you need to add some energy. You need to pump it up there. If I'm using my analogy of all the 10th graders in the school in here, I took all the 10th graders, I closed the doors. Could I get an 11th grader in here? I saw one coming. I could grab a senior and jam them into this room, right? But it's going to take some energy for me to do that. Joe's not just going to come into this room that's filled with 10th graders on his own. I got to put some energy in. That's active transport. Thanks, Joe. All right, see you at 4 o'clock. So I had to put a little bit of energy. It didn't take much energy to move Joe, but it did require some energy to move him into this more crowded area. Same is true of molecules. They don't want to go from a low to high concentration, but they can be forced. Just take some energy. And this is important. There's lots of situations. We don't need to get into the details of this, but the proton pump is an important way of cells maintaining an electrical gradient. It's important in nerve cells and muscle contractions and so forth. Okay. Any questions about osmosis, diffusion, or transport?